the pressures on farmers have gotten to a point where they've boiled over. And the big media might care a little bit more if tractors were rolling up and burning manure and, as they were trying to get into their offices. I was worried that they were invisible. That was my big aha, I think, is that, okay, this isn't right? You need a farmer every day, whether you think about it every day or not. You just do. So a lot of our farmers aren't making any money, and they're on a treadmill.
From Europe to India, farmers have taken to the streets in recent months to protest agricultural policies. Never in history have farmers protested on such a scale. The protests continue to spread throughout Europe, with more countries joining each and every week. First, we saw demonstrations erupting across Europe, with farmers forming blockades, dumping manure in cities, egging government buildings, and now thousands of farmers have marched to New Delhi in India in scenes that recall the mass protests of 2020 and 2021. Although the reasons for the agricultural workers' discontent differ from country to country, the ongoing unrest comes as the world's farmers are increasingly feeling under political attack. Now, around the world, farmers are waking up to the realities of a top-down centralized overregulation and the consequences of agricultural policies that are putting great pressure on farmers, in addition to rising input costs. So are the tractor barricades, the piles of manure in front of city buildings, and the bales of hay ablaze across the streets of Europe a wake-up call for farmers and lawmakers in the United States? I'm joined today by Dana DiPrima, who's the founder for the Farmers Movement, the For Farmers Movement, to find out. So, Dana, great to have you on the show. I'm really keen to hear how this issue is being received across the pond. What's your take on what's going on in Europe? How's the story being reported in the US?
Well, thanks for having me. It has definitely been reported. And I think farmers are, they have their eyebrows up. They're watching. I think that across the board with farmers and non-farmers, they're pretty impressed with the creativity with the
Yes.
I think manure in the streets and burning manure is attention grabbing. I think there are also some camps that are like, gosh, all that manure is actually pretty valuable to our farms. Like,
yes.
We want to burn that. So definitely has everyone's attention to some extent. I did talk to someone in the media a week and a half ago, and I was like, well, what about this issue with the EU and the farmers protesting? And do you want to talk about that from a U.S. perspective? Like, do you think our farmers, might do something like that? Are you worried about that? This is a big media outlet. So they were like, huh? What? So I'm not sure that the big media cares. The big media might care a little bit more if tractors were rolling up and burning manure and, as they were trying to get into their offices. I don't know that we have a modern history of protests and marches from a farmer perspective that is very recent in this country. Obviously, other protests, for sure. I have talked to a lot of farmers, and on the small farmer scale, they feel a little bit like they just don't even have the bandwidth to do something like this, right? So you're already working around the clock. They're exhausted, and they're really up against it financially. And, it's hard to find the right land. And they just have so many challenges that the idea of taking, quote unquote, time off to go and protest, I think for smaller farmers, and we're losing so many of them. We've lost in the period between 2017 and 2022, we lost 141,733 farms, most of them small. So I think on the small scale, everyone's watching, and they can be frustrated, right? There are certain things here that are at the top of the frustration scale. The Farm Bill is one of them. The fact that our government hasn't renewed a Farm Bill, hasn't passed a Farm Bill, is incredibly frustrating and kind of insulting.
Yeah, from my perspective, being overseas here, reading about the Farm Bill and learning about it, it does feel like it's just been kicked. The can has just been kicked down the road, and I can imagine how frustrating that has been for farmers.
Yes, They don't understand why they're not a priority, or maybe more importantly, why they're being used as a political pawn in, where food should not be a political issue. This is something that everybody needs. It's really, farmers are essential. The food and the fiber and the fuel that they produce here is also essential, both inside the United States and for exports. So I think that is particularly frustrating. There are other things that are really frustrating for small farmers. One of those is a piece of legislation called the PRIME Act. I don't know if you've heard of that, but basically what it would do is allow small farmers of beef and pork and lamb to have more processing opportunities so that they could sell their meat direct to consumer within their states where USDA processors have been closing up or moving closer to the bigger processors, right? So I think that a lot of these issues are super complicated, and, around that particular issue, one of the big issues there is that we have 4 big meat processors in this country that have formed an essential monopoly, right?
Yep.
So we have 85% of our beef, lamb, and pork is being processed by these 4 big companies. And I think this is where there's a little bit of a rub, like, we don't want the government to interfere with our business, yet we want the government to take care of the fact that we've got these big meat processors, right? And that they are putting small farms out of business kind of on purpose, because they would rather be the ones who are producing and controlling all of the meat, more than 85 or 90% of it, right? So is our government going to deal with the monopoly, oligopoly, or, do we not want them to regulate that? I think that those issues get really complicated. We want a Prime Act so we can process our meat better locally, and we would love for the big meat conglomerates and their lobbies to get out of the way of farmers doing their own work. So if things, there are certain tensions out there, and I know that in the, in the UK, in the EU, in India, et cetera, the pressures on farmers have gotten to a point where they've boiled over.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting to hear about the smaller farmers in the US watching with interest. I think we've got a much smaller geographical landmass here, so it's slightly different in terms of our agricultural capacity compared to the United States. But I think there's a similar thing started here, that with the smaller farmers were kind of reluctant to participate, not because they weren't unwilling, but because of the same reasons you outlined. They're very busy. They've got, a lot of pressure on them already. But I think it reached a tipping point, and the UK kind of lagged behind the rest of Europe. And I think that's partly due to the fact that the United Kingdom left the European Union, so it hasn't been exposed to some of the same policies, but there have been related issues. And there's 5 or 6 kind of core common issues across the different countries, but each country seems to have its own distinct challenges, depending on the kind of regional, national policies in their area. Would you say, it's fascinating to hear about the Prime Act, but with the food bill, is there... I've done quite a bit of background reading on this now, and it feels like it backs up what you're saying. Would I be right in saying that this act has done and has the potential to continue to really favour those larger monopolies and corporates at the expense of smaller farmers, or does it go to some extent, or could it go to some extent to supporting the small and mid-sized farmers? What's your take on the farming bill in the US?
What I understand from smaller farmers is that there are, and who knows where it nets out, in the halls of Congress, but that there are some really good provisions for smaller farmers in there. I don't know exactly what all of them are, but that's what I'm hearing on the ground, is that, okay, the Farm Bill is an omnibus legislation. It's a huge piece of legislation, and it has everything under the kitchen sink in there. Which includes, SNAP benefits for families that can't afford, food, that needs assistance in affording food. And, now they're able to use those SNAP benefits or EBT at farmers markets and the like, and there I think a lot of little provisions in there. Most of it is for big farmers, and the biggest part of the bill is actually food assistance programs.
Okay, and then with the proposed renewal this year, do you think that could have a inflammatory effect depending on how that goes? Is there any prospect that farmers would react to that in a way? It's clearly an electoral year, so lots of things are being politicized that wouldn't normally be politicized. Is there kind of a well, yeah, I don't live and breathe American politics, but yeah, it seems like everything's politicized right now. But is there a risk that the changes or amendments to the bill could spark something in the US?
Let me say this. Some of the reading that I've done on what's going on in the EU is speculation that the bigger agricultural industries have said, oh, well, we bought you those tractors, get them out there because we want you to protest about the environmental regulations that the governments are interested in having, and that they're looking at ag and big ag to say, okay, we need to do better environmentally, right? I get it. They don't want to make changes. So, and I think this goes to the reluctance of the small farmer. They just don't have time. They don't even have tractors that big. Let's just call a spade a spade. Those big tractors are not owned by small farmers. So I think when there are changes of any kind, and yes, everything is politicized here, and if you're talking about the environment and environmental regulations, I know that the USDA has put in place new environmental, let's call them regulations. I'm not sure exactly how they're categorized, but that some environmental groups, like the Environmental Working Group, has, they're sort of looked under the hood and said, like, okay, well, wait a minute, are we actually making changes that will impact what's going on in the environment? And I think you see this around farming all the time, is there are buzzwords. And so how are those buzzwords enacted in legislation? Sort of what's the bigger story there? And I can't speak to it. I'm not an environmental expert, and I don't know the specifics of the regulations. I do know that those headlines, though, get a lot of attention.
Of course. Yeah.
Again, farmers, if I'm going to generalize, sorry, farmers, but if I'm going to generalize, they don't really want you to tell them how they need to farm. Okay? They don't. But we know that the bigger, more industrial farmers, and the ones that I've talked with who have converted out of that industrial complex, so to speak, is that when you go big, you can't get off the treadmill, right? You've got a loan. You have to pay the loan. You have to grow enough or produce enough so that you have cash to pay off that loan. That happens first, and your profits happen last. So a lot of our farmers aren't making any money, and they're on a treadmill. And I've talked to plenty of farmers in Indiana and in Georgia and Virginia and in Kansas who are, they're tired of being on that treadmill. Their inputs are expensive. Nitrogen, phosphorus, all of the things that they, the fertilizers that they need to use are expensive. And getting off of that treadmill is really, really challenging. So, the government kind of put them in this position by subsidizing what they were doing. And it just gets super complicated. It's just, there's not a really easy answer or an easy fix. But generally speaking, farmers don't want to be told by the government that they can't sell raw milk and that they, that they have to do this. There's a new piece of, it's not legislation, it's a new regulation that came out recently with the USDA about RISD. I think it's RFID tags in cattle ears. Have you heard of these?
I've heard of the tags, but I haven't heard of their use in cattle specifically.
Yeah, they're little, tracking devices that you put in your cattle's ear. And it can help you as a rancher figure out where your cattle are, right? So you can take your horse or your ATV over the hill and get that all back, okay? But there is some new regulation where I think the USDA is leaning towards a mandatory tag in cattle's ears, and the speculation is that the government wants to know how many cows you have and where they are, and for if you follow the line of what people think that's for, is maybe there's going to be a carbon tax on the number of cattle that you have. Maybe there's something else. So it's unclear. And I don't think that anybody, consumers or farmers, ranchers, etc., I don't think they appreciate when things are not transparent. And here's an example. Just the other day, on the good side, if we want to go that way, with the USDA, is that they changed a labeling rule that if the label says made in the USA, it has to be born and bred here and processed here. And 2 days ago, that wasn't the case. So you could raise your cow in Uruguay, slaughter it in Uruguay, bring the entire carcass here to the United States and cut it up into steaks and call it made in the USA. No one like that. I know consumers don't, when they hear about that, they're like, what? Why are we doing that? Like, why don't you just tell me where my steak is from? We want that transparency. So there's been a lot of applause on the consumer side of things and on the farmer rancher side of things for that kind of regulation. So I'm just saying, complicated can go both ways.
Yes, agreed. I totally agree with that. There's always more to the story than meets the eye. There's a lot of nuance in these things. And again, a common theme, I suppose, in a lot of areas is this concentration of power within kind of a monopoly of groups and their lobby effect on governments. That's been a clear impact. We're seeing the smaller providers left behind. And of course, because of the cost of living crisis that we've had here, it's spun into business as well, increased utility costs, which has put more pressure on already farmers who've got low margins and, unable to earn a decent livable wage. And I'd imagine that's probably comparable in the US. And it seems that there's kind of been a latent frustration amongst the farmer population that this has been a catalyst event that's kind of had a spillover into this more broader protest. And it's almost like a confluence of concerns have all come together to create this eruption. So I'm curious in the kind of context of your overall work. It'd be lovely to hear a little bit about, how you started the For Farmers movement and what it's designed to represent, and then overlay that a little bit with, some of the underlying factors that inspired you to do that may be playing out that have commonalities with what we're seeing here in Europe.
So I have a podcast called Talk Farm to Me that I started in 2019, talking to farmers all the time. It's quite a privilege. I don't know. Maybe it's a guilty pleasure. I love these conversations. They're the most interesting, intelligent, innovative people. So fascinating. And early on in...
Well, firstly, I'll stop you there because interesting, the media portrayal of farmers in the UK, they've been smeared. And that's not the impression that people are being given in the press right now in response to these protests. They're really defamatory towards farmers, criticizing their intelligence. They've been politicized, smeared as, part of the political spectrum. It's just completely offensive. And so I'm so pleased to hear you say that, because it's so important that and there's been some brilliant farmers who have really risen to that, because there's some wonderful, articulate, intelligent people who have been willing to step up in front of that and say, well, hang on a minute. Let me set you straight. So it's lovely to hear that at first.
Yeah. As an example, I interviewed this rancher out in Oregon, right? He raises beef right?
Yes.
He also works in Silicon Valley. So he straddles these two worlds. Many farmers here have two jobs. He does too. This is his family ranch. He still runs it, but he works in Silicon Valley. He says, Silicon Valley, smartest people in the world. So smart. Ranchers run circles around them. Circles. In terms of intelligence. He would take a rancher anytime.
Amazing.
Yeah. So,
Amazing.
These are the kinds of things that...
Well, Silicon Valley's moving to Texas now, so, there's a lot more ranches out that way. So
so we'll have more crossover.
Yes.
Crossbreeding with the Silicon Valley and the ranchers.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. For the future of our intelligence, for sure.
Yes.
So I think across all of the work that I've done with farmers through the podcast and elsewhere, I was worried that they were invisible. That was my big aha, I think, is that, okay, this isn't right? You need a farmer every day, whether you think about it every day or not. You just do. So, really on that central principle, I started the For Farmers movement to help share farmer stories, continuing with that podcast. I do it through writing and social media, dispelling myths, like you said, about farmers not being intelligent. So one of the farmers who we awarded grants to, and I will get to that in a second, she was at a farmer's market and she had hired an intern, very well decorated in terms of her university prowess, right? And she was just saying how excited she was that this young woman was coming to work on her farm. And her customer said, gosh, that is so weird, so unfortunate that someone so smart all she would want to do is run a farm, right? So balance that with the beef guy in Silicon Valley.
Yes.
And so, another part of the For Farmers movement is dispelling myths, just like that one. We just don't let that kind of thing stand, and we find all kinds of examples. They're actually really easy to find to dispel them. But I think if you're a farmer and you're busy and you can't get off your tractor to tell me the truth, then I'll make one up. That's the problem that they face.
Mm-hmm.
And so the other part of that is supporting farmers in specific ways. We run a grants program that starts October 12th every year now, which is National Farmers Day. Farmers are very proud. They do not really want your charity. However, they love to hear that you're grateful for their work. And so we have a nominations process, and people across the country in all 50 states nominate their farmers and ranchers. And we have a panel of reviewers. We review their applications for the farmers that submit them. And we've awarded 75 grants in our first year, last year, to farmers in 38 states. So,
wow.
And they are, farmers really know best what they need. They don't need you to tell them, or the USDA really to tell them what they need on their farm. Sometimes what they need is fencing. Sometimes they need to recover from a loss. There are, I think with a lot of small farmers, there are very few opportunities for financial support that isn't tethered to hours and hours of applications and tremendously onerous reporting requirements.
Yes.
I've been on the grant side in other lives, and I know that to be a fact. It can just be such a burden. So we're not like that.
Good.
We're like, okay, we selected you. Here's your money. Keep us posted on how it's going and let us know if you need some help. So that's really what we do right now. I'm in the middle of a Love Your Farmers campaign that culminates next Tuesday on March 19th, which is National Ag Day. People have been thanking their farmers across the country. They give me an email address, and basically a waterfall of thank yous comes their way through care package and a handwritten postcard by volunteers. It's, and a email thank you. And then they go into a drawing for a mini project grant, because every single farmer across the world has a mini project that's back there on the back burner that if they had a little mini grant for, they would do it. And it can mean the difference between I'm going to quit because my morale is so low, I can't handle it anymore. And it can mean the difference. I heard from a farmer the other day, like a mini grant, like could mean the difference for us in trying something new and not trying something new. And that trying something new could put us into a new market. So
Absolutely.
So it really functions on the idea that little things mean a lot. I think if you're a consumer and you're not thinking about your farmers right now, I'm going to give you 7 really easy things that you could do, that you can choose from to make a difference, where you do not have to put your life into a screeching halt and only think about farmers like I do. You can just do one small thing and it can move the needle. And I see it move the needle all the time. And I think that's, as far as like this, across the pond kind of conversation, I think those little things matter. I think they do have an impact. But the other thing that's really important in addition or on top of making sure our farmers aren't invisible is when there are big problems in agriculture, big ag, that maybe customers, where is this coming from? Like the whole green, like let's, take better care of our environment. I subscribe to that. I'll be honest. Like I think that we should all be taking better care of our environment, but I don't believe that it's all like that all the onus should be on agriculture. I think that people don't recognize, and maybe politicians the world over are not emphasizing the fact that farmers have an opportunity that other people don't have to sequester carbon, to have animals and plants living together like nature intended.
Yes.
Good things happen when that happens. And I think that you can, work in a high rise and have zero opportunity to sequester carbon. Zero. You do not. You can get an electric car if you want, but you're not putting carbon in the ground the way that a farmer can. If that's society's concern, and we are not looking at the power of the farmer to support the environment, to have, carbon going into the ground. Our local communities, like having viably economically strong local communities, having a stronger economy, making sure that the people who live in rural communities can be more connected, both economically and otherwise with, in our country, at least, the rural and urban divide is big and getting bigger, and it's not helpful. So if we're going to leave rural out of the conversation, we're going to lose. So that's the power of healthier food. I don't think anybody's going to, I don't know. For me, the carrot that's grown in the soil down the road, a small farmer is probably a better carrot, probably tastes better, probably better for me than one that was grown with all kinds of additives in the ground.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a few strands I'll pick up on. So, well, firstly, one of the big taglines in the UK in particular has been this no farmers, no food. There's a big campaign around that. And it's really kind of celebrating the value of farmers and localized farming in order to supply local and regional. And it's kind of a shame it has to kind of take a negative, really, because it's not so much a celebration. It's almost like, well, wait a minute, if we're going to put these farmers out of business, what are we going to do about food? Well, we're going to have the cheap subsidized stuff from other parts of Europe. It's really put pressure on local farmers. And we kind of captured the top 5 reasons why people are protesting, but we put in a 6th, which is the general feeling that farmers' work is devalued and that their past grievances have been ignored or dismissed. And even around the climate issues and the environmental issues, I'd rather describe them as environmental issues, is that there's a lot of those intelligent farmers that you're speaking about who are really pushing back on governments, because it's all very easy to sit in your central glass tower of the government and have actually no idea how farms work and how they support not only nature, the environment, but also local economies, and put these policies in place, which, as you said, there's a lot of evidence to say that these policies and incentives don't actually help. They sometimes have the opposite effect. And there's been some brilliant young farmers in the UK who have taken to like some TikTok and just done almost like these explainer videos and taking you around the farm and saying, let me show you the life cycle of what happens in a farm, not just in a short space, but over a 10, 15-year period, and how that actually improves the environmental condition. And they also highlight that it's those big ag companies that are ever expanding that actually are the ones causing greater harms. It's not the smaller farms that have got a generally consistent agricultural base, whether that's cattle or whatnot. And that's been beautiful to see as well, just the pushback, just saying, let me show you how it works. Not just tell you in a paper, let me show you. And there's been some amazing regenerative farmers as well who are pioneering new ways of farming, who are actually showing that, when you actually use more natural methods, it benefits not only the cattle, but the soil and the ecosystem and the end produce. So it's been remarkable to kind of see that in response to these kind of centralized policies that don't seem grounded in reality. It's almost grounded in a trend rather than what's actually important. So I'm on a bit of a rant here because it's been something that I've really appreciated seeing from the farmers themselves. Actually, taking to the. I
mean, it's a good point. Okay, right? Like some of the bigger farmers that I have had the privilege of getting to know, they look at what's happening and they have turned back their farms to, more like older, more traditional practices that mimic nature, what nature does. Mm. Nature does not just have cows in one place. Cows actually, if it's actually remarkable. If you drive through the countryside in any country, cows space themselves out almost like a picture. I'm like, how do they? It looks like someone placed them. They do not want to be. They are a herd, but they don't all want to be like sitting in a little pen. Okay, so whatever you think about that, but nature, I have a little farm. My chickens follow my donkeys around. Why? Because the donkeys are kicking up bugs. Yes. And, that's how they get more food. And then they have manure and there are bugs there and the chickens are psyched about that. So that's just how nature works. And I think that there are a lot of farmers who are looking back and saying, like, we've been through the Green Revolution. We do not want to be knee deep in pesticides. This isn't good for our bodies as farmers. It's not good for our land. It's not good for our water. We're losing soil. There was a farmer in Indiana who's all corn and soybeans. It's like our whole country's corn and soybeans. And he was asked by a company, he says, can you do non-GMO corn and soybeans? Because this is what we need it for our dairy farm, or our dairy operation. He's like, sure. So he started converting and he started watching. He's a total data hound. He started watching the conversion. I just want to make this point because his inputs were $800 an acre for the nitrogen, the pesticides, all the things. Okay? $800. He converted his entire 6,000 acre farm per acre, $80 in cover crop seeds. Now, there was a transition between the two.
Of course.
Those numbers don't speak to bigger industrial ag.
Yes.
I don't know what will.
Wow. Now, so now is your Four Farmers movement, is that predominantly US based, or do you have because I was just thinking as we're talking, our people across the United Kingdom and Europe, I don't know, if you're looking to expand, but there's a moment in history of now, like these farmers are hungry for support.
Let's do it.
So I think, well, hopefully we can be a little spark and we can send people your way, because
that would be great. Prior to all of this, I spent a lot of time working for big companies and trying to, in a marketing level and helping them develop hearts and souls that matter to their bottom line. And, you can't, you just sort of have to bite off what you can chew. And I didn't want it to be a local project. I care very deeply about my local farms and whatnot, and certainly they know about it. But you've got to be local, and then national. And then ultimately, and I do have a lot of farmers who are like, wait, we're in Canada. Can we do this? And I was like, yeah, not yet, but yes.
Yes.
But yeah, we could totally expand it to the UK and EU. Be very happy to do that. I mean, this is, when I say movement, this is what I mean. This is the spirit of the For Farmers movement. And that is that we support farmers $1 at a time. So I put my dollar on the table and you put your dollar on the table. And we tell our friends and they all do it. So nobody hurts. But, if you came to me and said, Dana, I've got $1 million for you, I would say thank you. But the spirit of the For Farmers movement is $1 million, $1 at a time from 1 million people. It's not hard to do that. And it's important because I think with that $1, is a small awareness of the fact that support is needed and that if I do it, the needle will move.
Yes. It puts the power into the hands of the people, and you avoid the the challenges that then come with the big contributions, which I agree, would be very helpful to the farmers, but it may, like many of the policies and incentives, come with conditions which are not necessarily favorable to the mission. So you've always got that challenge when the money's involved. So I love that kind of grassroots approach.
It's important to be for farmers. It's important to be condition free.
Yes.
Meaning, I hear from farmers all the time, I can't believe that was it. You just sent me the money. I wish me good luck.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So I think that first time someone takes advantage of my, the spirit of the movement would be a first. I just think that farmers really know. And I've had farmers call me and say, hey, Dana, listen, we've got a crisis. Can we pivot? I was like, sure, tell me what's going on. And also, like, what is going on? Like, before it gets to the point of this whole big crisis, what can we do?
Absolutely.
I don't know. Sometimes a crisis is necessary to sort of bang the cymbals together and say, hey, carrots don't come from the grocery store.
Yes.
Don't. Come from the farmer. And I'm out here working my butt off for you. So let's just have some mutual respect.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, there's a couple of that's made me think of a couple of other strands of conversation. I don't know how much time we've got, but it's controversial one. I've been paying a bit of attention to this lab-grown food story, lab-grown meat, lab-grown produce. I have a lot of concerns about that in the long term, mainly through what I would describe as unintended consequences and unpredictable outcomes that come from literally manufacturing food in a laboratory using non-natural processes. And I've had some, when I've put content out on this, I've had some pushback, and they've described that, it's from, the cells are still taken from live sources. Yeah, but everything that happens in between is not natural. So do you feel that's a threat to the farming industry? Do you have a particularly strong opinion or view on that issue?
Oh, gosh. I mean,
you don't have to go there. It just came up as because you were saying, like, the carrots from the farm are like, well, at the moment they are.
I'm not a believer in lab-grown meat. You will never get me to eat it.
Me either. We're on the same page there.
But I also think, again, going back to that, like, fourth generation factory farming, making a living, family farm. I know one in Bluffton, Georgia. He had an aha moment. He's like, this isn't how it should be done. We need cows and pigs and sheep and chickens, and we need honeybees, and we need ducks, turkeys and rabbits, and all of the species here. And we need to do it well, and we need to do it right by creating an environment that is just like nature. I mean, what are we going to come up with next? Like, we're just going to get a fake sun to come up? Like, it's already done for us. Let's take advantage of the power of nature. And I just think, have you ever heard this expression, the emphasis is on the wrong syllable? Have you heard that?
No, I haven't. No.
Okay, well, I think the emphasis is on the wrong syllable when they're talking about creating factory, meat in a petri dish.
Yeah.
I don't know. They think it's not environmentally better. It's a whole laboratory, all kinds of inputs, and it's insanity. But I think also, if there's something wrong with our agricultural system, let's figure out how to fix it. Let's not make a new system that's inherently flawed, right?
Agreed.
This is where, I don't know. I've been thinking about this a lot. Our small farmers, the world over, have a tremendous amount of power that they're not necessarily seeing. They're like, we're little. I'm like, yes, you're powerful. You are creating the healthiest carrots for me. Those are healthy for me because when I eat them, they're healthy for me because of the soil that they are contributing to. They're healthy for my local economy because that dollar is whizzing around there 7 times, supporting all of those other families and businesses.
Absolutely.
So I think, again, the emphasis might be on the wrong syllable.
Yes.
All farmers, stop, thinking you don't have the power. You do. I'll also say this from a government standpoint. I learned this recently, is that a representative in Congress or in the Senate or wherever they are, when people call them, they pay attention because you know what? We're all too busy to call. And it's not that many.
True. Yep.
10 calls?
Yep.
20? Can we get 100 calls on whatever it is that we care about to our representatives? Right? So if that's happening, if people are taking small actions like that for things that they care about very deeply, like please make the labels on our beef. I want to know that my burger came from here. Why do we have to import the burger? Or tell me it's imported and I'll buy that one if that's my value, if that's what I want.
Yep.
But don't hide it from me, right?
Yes.
Those kind of calls, they make a difference. I use this example a lot, and I haven't looked in your supermarkets recently, but in our supermarkets, the egg cartons are it's a lot of real estate. It's probably got a cute chicken on it. Might have a picture of me gathering the eggs from, whatever, but it also has a lot of labeling on there. It says non-GMO, vegetarian fed. Chickens aren't vegetarians, side note. But all of these labels that are on those cartons, those were not put there by the company. They were put there by you because you demanded it. So again, people just don't understand what their power is. If you want to change it, speak up.
Absolutely. That's been a core message for all of our content really in the last few years. It's giving people the confidence and feeling empowered to do so when they see something that's not right. And most of our content is exploring these wider macro issues, and there's plenty of them. So we need plenty of people who are willing to speak up and to take action, even if it's small actions, because in the same way that each dollar makes a difference, each voice makes a difference. And that for us is such an important message in order to actually liberate the kind of change that we need to create in these different industries. The final thread I want to touch upon, which actually again stems from what you've just said, because during COVID here we had the toilet paper crisis. I don't know if you had that in the United States, but there's this panic. You run to the supermarket hoarding toilet rolls. But then there was a similar crisis with food. We go to supermarkets and a lot of it was amplified by the media, and it was just created hysteria, which actually made the problem worse because people would go and empty the shelves. But what that actually led to was a kind of fear around food security, which actually spawned a new level of self-sovereignty when it comes to food growing. So a lot of people have started their own small holdings or started growing food for themselves. And there's a wonderful project where I'm based here in the south of England, and there's a little community called Nourish Community. They started the growing produce during 2020, during the lockdowns, initially in response to that issue, but it became a passion for them. And they've grown this amazing produce now, and they've started as a non-profit. They give it all to different causes locally. They give away all of their produce. but they're growing now. So they're looking at different ways that they can expand their operation. But that's just one story of many that we've seen in response to that particular situation. Are you seeing the same now as well? Are you seeing much more? Is there a kind of liberation of the smaller, or even just small holdings? Is there something that you're seeing now on the rise in the US?
Well, certainly during the pandemic, we experienced similar toilet paper panic, real food panics.
Yeah.
And people were scrambling to find a farmer. Do you know a farmer? How do you find a farmer? Hatcheries were sold out of chicks. They were definitely sold out of pullets. They were sold out of hatching eggs. So people were getting backyard chickens in record numbers. I mean, it was crazy. Okay. And I think a lot of people have maintained that, maybe not all of them, but there was definitely, the idea that, okay, well, I'm going to grow things, but also finding a farmer where you could participate in a CSA. On the flip side, farmers were feeling really for the first time like that they were labeled essential.
Yes.
And that was such a huge honor. And the ripple effect was, we're being seen. People find us to be valuable.
Yes.
And it was helpful to their businesses. And things have swung back kind of unfortunately, to the old normal, maybe slightly adjusted. But, we've gone back to, the farmer's market was the only place you could really gather and go because it was outside. So, I think it's swung back the other way. But it's a good reminder. I mean, and farmers struggled as well. We were dumping milk, and it really pointed out a lot of the cracks in regional food and global, right? It's global, national, regional, local. It just sort of, the cracks sort of started and they just kept going to say that, well, 50 years ago, you would have these small farms. 100 years ago, you had, all of our families were, we all had a cow. My grandmother had, chicken dinner that she'd go out and chop the head off with rooster, right? So, it seems, generations, it seems really far away, but we were all way more connected with farms and with that kind of food security. Remember victory gardens?
I don't know.
Helping the war effort.
Oh, well, that's right. But yeah.
So, here's the thing, is that I doubt we're going to go back to a more agricultural society, despite the fact that more people who weren't doing any sort of agricultural activities are doing some now. They have chickens. I didn't have chickens before 2010. My daughter was like, can we get chickens? I'm like, sure. And that just led to a whole farm of goats and donkeys and bees and ducks and whatever, right? But similar opportunity exists if you say, I am never going to kill a chicken to put on my dinner table. It's a fine admission. You do not have to. But I am going to know somebody who's going to raise that chicken just the way I might, with my values, so that I can put it on my table. So I go to Mark, I get my chickens.
Amazing. Donna,
farmer. I don't know.
This has been an amazing conversation and inspiring what you're doing. And yeah, I do think, about 30% of our audience is in the US. So hi to the folks over in the US, but we've got people all over the UK and Europe, and you might get some inbound inquiries from following this. I would love to actually introduce you, because we're going to interview a number of the prominent farmers who are involved in the protests here. I'd love to introduce you to them. It'd be very interesting to hear them on your podcast. Right. And if you fancy a trip over to Europe, we're going to get in the field and we're going to go and see if we can grab ourselves a tractor and do some in the field conversations with farmers at the protests. So if you fancy a holiday to Europe, we might see you there doing some of those conversations.
Great. I'll come check it out.
Yeah, and for our friends watching the show, and for any farmers who are interested, where can they go to find out about the Full Farmers movement, out of curiosity?
Sure. It's very easy to find at forfarmersmovement.com. Most of the information is there. You can find the Talk Farm to Me podcast there, anywhere you listen to your podcast, so you can meet some of the farmers that I've mentioned. I'm certainly happy if you send me a message. I'm happy to direct you to the, some of the ones that I think you might want to hear. I'm also on Instagram at XOXO Farm Girl. So you can find me there. And I'm always happy to talk and definitely to connect with farmers, but also to hear, people's concerns and questions, because I think if we're not having an open conversation about what's going on and answering some of the key questions about why this and why that, like things that people don't understand, they should be conversations that consumers are having with farmers. And I love the opportunity to, really connect those thoughts and ideas because I think that's, it shouldn't be an us and them. It shouldn't be farmers against the government. It shouldn't be consumers in the, in the EU thinking that farmers are terrible or dumb or any of that. Like, that's just not productive. So ask your questions, ask hard questions, and I'm sure you'll get thoughtful answers. So.
Amazing. Thanks for that. So in closing, is there a message that you would send to the farmers in Europe and the United Kingdom from your perspective at home in the US?
Wow. Well, you've got our attention for sure. I just hope that there can be, an opportunity for dialogue that ends in a way that's favorable. I don't know. I don't know what that is. It seems very complicated. I mean, it's attention getting, yes, but what you don't want is you don't want the farmers to have not the results they want. And I think, I think there's some bending going on. That's at least what I've seen in some of the headlines.
Yeah.
But I guess I'll close with this. That Indiana farmer that I mentioned, who was approached by a company, who was approached by their consumers, right? This is, consumer to company to farmer, and said, can you do non-GMO? Now, he had GMO everything. He was putting all kinds of things in the soil. But he heard that message. And regardless of what comes out of all of this, and I'm not taking sides here, but messages are coming, and some farmers are listening, and they're taking advantage of the fact that they want to be the farmers who are part of the future, right? So when these battles happen, there are other messages. And if you're listening to them, you're thinking about the future of your farm. And you're thinking about 3 generations from now, that farm's still surviving. So issues about the environment, and government's interest, which probably comes from consumer interest in solving some of these problems, I think it's better to be part of the solution. And that message is coming. So, I mean, everybody has to deal with it in their own way. I totally get the protests. I don't think the government had a conversation with the farmers about hey, what could the solution,
Yes, it's completely lacking. Yeah.
Solutions.
Yeah.
I don't think it's ever productive to say, bam,
here's how it is. Yeah, exactly.
We want to fix this. And I think that was what I was saying earlier about the environmental working group, looking at, what is the USDA doing to address this? It's hard to tell if there's anything real here. So it can't just be lip service to, we want a greener world. We want to, save the planet, all of those things. This should not be a fight. I believe that farmers are on the same side. They want their land to be productive. They want their cattle to be healthy. I just think that we have to listen to each other, and we have to talk about, here are our problems. Let's involve people in finding out what the solution can be, short and long term, in a way that's beneficial to everyone. But when I run the world, that's how we'll do it.
Well, that's a message straight of what we call Common Sense Corner. So, that very well said. So, Dana, thanks so much for being here with us on the podcast. Fascinating conversation, and great to hear the work that you're doing with the For Farmers movement. So please do go check that out. The links that we were discussing during the course of this episode will be in the description and the show notes. So look those up. Please do share this episode. This is a hot topic right now. Let's get the conversation started so more and more people can understand how they can contribute and understand what's happening right now.